All right, so I get it. I'm recognizable, and if you see me out in public, you may want to interact with me. I 100% get it. But man, I wish some of these interactions weren't weird, and I certainly wish some of these interactions weren't physical. I got three or four stories to tell you, and the final one is the story about getting manhandled at the deli by a complete stranger. Let's talk about it. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to La Lido Loca. I am your host, Tony, here with a storytime episode. A storytime episode about stranger danger, about the fun and foils of meeting people on a cruise ship that you do not know at all. There's been episodes like this before where I've chronicled the interesting interactions I've had with strangers on cruise ships, and well, this one will be added to the pantheon of those type of videos. Look, I've said it before, I'll continue to say it. Creating content around cruising on YouTube has changed my life. This is the most satisfied and successful that I have ever been at anything I've ever done. The most satisfied creatively, the most satisfied vocationally, the most satisfied lifestyle-ly than I've ever been. I am blessed coming and going. And one of the cool aspects of making content here on YouTube that you guys watch and consume is the ability to meet you guys out there on cruise ships. I've had thousands of interactions with strangers, people that I do not know at all, and I've met a whole bunch of wonderful people, but I have had a handful, maybe two handfuls, of quirky interactions. And, well, the catalyst for this video is I had a quirky interaction just a few days ago on the Carnival Spirit at the Deli, where I was straight up manhandled. Honestly, the manhandling was a little unsettling, and as I contemplated that interaction, a flood of other quirky interactions came to mind, so I thought I would share a few of them with you. Quirky interaction number one, I was called a liar about my introversion. This happened last year on a cruise ship. I had a pretty normal routine on that cruise ship because I was staying in a very small interior cabin. And so I would do my daily video editing in the Starbucks that they had on board. And because I was out there in that very public location, very often I would meet people who enjoy the show. And it was great. People would come up, they'd say hi, we liked the show, we'd have a great interaction. And it was all good until I met one gentleman who said, hey, can I sit down and talk to you about my cruising adventures? Do you have 10 or 15 minutes? And I said, sure, have a seat. So this gentleman sat down across from me at a table in a Starbucks on a cruise ship, and he regaled. He regaled about his cruising adventures. And honestly, he was a pretty interesting guy. It was interesting to hear his stories, and all was going well until he hit me with the statement that is not going to be followed by, something good. He said, hey, can I say something to you that might, upset you? I just want to tell you something. And I'm like, gosh, man, I always just want to say no in that circumstance. Like if you're going to say something that you think's going to upset me and you're a stranger, probably let's just not say it. But I said, okay, yeah, let me know. And I wasn't sure what he was going to say. And he said, well, I just want to let you know that I think you are lying about being an introvert. And that was tough to process. I was like, you think I am lying? Oh, he's joking. I was like, yeah. Yeah. Why do you say that? He said, well, we've had this very engaging conversation for the last 10 minutes. And I've come to the conclusion that the reason that you say that you are an introvert is because you don't want people to bother you. And I was like, are you for real? And he's like, yes. I said, so you're sitting here right across from me at this Starbucks on a cruise ship, and you're essentially saying that I'm lying about my shyness and my introversion. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I don't know what to do with that. And so I tried to explain to it, if you're an introvert, if you're a shy person, if you don't like to have interactions with strangers, but you are forced to have interactions with strangers, you can do one or two things. You can hide away and never show your face in a situation where you're going to have to interact with strangers, or you can come up with techniques where you can get yourself through that process. And I explained all that to him, and he goes, yeah, I don't think that's true. I just think you're a liar. And I was like, well, it was great talking to you. I'm going to go back to work now. And I popped my earphones back in and started editing, and he walked off kind of disgruntled. I didn't know what to do with that. I try to be very transparent, and I try to be very honest. And I feel like when you're transparent and when you're honest, that's what authentic is. And so I try to, be honest about how I feel with these interactions. That way it's not a bad time for whoever's trying to interact with me. I genuinely want people to know that I struggle with strangers. And I guess on this day, the guy he wasn't buying it, I guess. Maybe I'm just doing these interactions too good. But that's quirky interaction number 1. Quirky interaction number 2 also involves a phrase which is not going to be followed by anything that's going to make you feel good about life. I met a guy in a corridor on a cruise ship. Walked up to me, hey man, love the show. Can I get a selfie? I appreciate what you do every day. I watch every day. We got the selfie, and the interaction was wrapping up, and he said, hey, before I go, I just want to say I do love the show, but there's one thing that I cannot stand. There's one thing that drives me crazy about the show. There's one thing that you have to change, or I'm going to unsubscribe. I said, okay, what is it? He said, it's the theme song. I'm so sick of listening to the theme song. I watch it every day. I know it's short, but I hate it. It's horrible. It doesn't make sense with your show. And I was like, well, I'm not getting rid of the theme song. A lot of people like the theme song. I like the theme song. He's like, well, then you may just lose me as a subscriber. Look, I'm not naive to the fact that my work will be critiqued. It will be praised or criticized. I'm not, naive to that fact. But just so people know, I'll just put it out here into the universe. If I'm walking around on a cruise ship, just hanging out, chilling, I'm not looking for unsolicited advice. I'm not looking for a heavy critique of my show. Certainly, it makes me feel good when you say you like the show, but I'm not looking for you to pick apart the show, especially to my face. That's what we leave the comments for, that kind of thing. So if I sat you down and said, hey, we're doing some sort of study group here, can you tell me 5 things you don't like about the show? That's different than me just meeting you. So, again, do what you want. It's a free world, that kind of thing. But just know, I'm not like Jesus over here. If you start critiquing my show hard and heavy when I'm not looking for a critique, it may not be a great interaction. If you start tearing down stuff that I love or people that I love, well, my face may adjust to how I'm feeling about that. That's just the way it is. And I love the theme song, so there you go. Quirky interaction number 3 has actually happened more than once, but it's typically this interaction happens by older dudes, like dudes older than me. I feel like guys that are in their 60s and 70s, they always come up. They're always wearing a hat. I don't know why. They come up and they'll say, hey man, we appreciate the fact that you do the show. We love the show, but we're sick of seeing you. We're sick of seeing you on the show. We're sick of seeing you on the cruise ship. We would much rather be looking at your wife, Jenny. We'd much rather be talking to your wife, Jenny. And I'm like, dude, that's okay. That's kind of disrespectful. And I never say it, but the thing that I always want to say is for all of these interactions, I would much rather have some attractive woman like my wife coming up and telling me that they love the show than some crusty old pervy dude that just wants to look at my wife. I never say that. I probably should say that. But just know, if you're out there and the interaction that you want to have with me is to tell me how you don't want to look at me or listen to me, you just want to look at my wife, you just want to ogle my wife, as it were, we don't even have to have that conversation because, look, I'm sure your wife's better looking than you, or whoever your significant other is. I'm sure they're hotter and more interesting than you. I would love to talk to them instead of you, but it is what it is. You're here in my face and I'm here in your face, so let's find something else to talk about. And look, I'm sure everybody thinks they're just being funny, but honestly, it's not funny to talk about ogling my wife. Like, I'm a dude. I understand how dudes work. So yeah, I don't need to think about you thinking about my wife. So maybe back it off there, Grandpa. Quirky interaction number 4. This one happened on a cruise ship. I was spending time with a fine gentleman in the casino, played a lot of blackjack hands together, and somehow we started talking about, I don't know, the ocean or something like that. And we started talking about sharks, maybe like a shark documentary or something. And I was like, yeah, man, I'm very fascinated by sharks, great white sharks. It's amazing to see. And could you imagine if something happened and we ended up in the water and, having to deal with sharks? So we must have been talking about like a shipwreck or something like that. And he looked at me and he goes, well, you and I have been spending a lot of time together. I feel pretty confident that if we were in the ocean together, I wouldn't have to worry about sharks because, look at you, the sharks would eat you first. And I was like, wow, this went from a nice interaction to some dude just randomly, making fun of how fat I am. I mean, yeah, I could have made fun of that guy. He had his own foibles, his own flaws, but I'm not really into making fun of other people for their foibles and flaws. But it's certainly hard not to think that in the moment when you're getting made fun of for your foibles and your flaws. But yeah, it's weird. Again, quirky. Quirky is what I'm trying to say. Quirky interaction numero 5. This one happened on my last cruise. I was at the blackjack table playing some blackjack. I was full on in the decision-making process for what I was going to do with my 16 versus the dealer's 10. And I was getting ready to, announce my move to the dealer when some guy runs right up to me and says, Tony, there's something I got to talk to you about. I got to ask you a question. It's very important. And I'm like, all right, man, can we wait until I complete this hand so that I can, step away or something like that? And he's like, never mind. Maybe I'll catch you some other time. And I didn't see the guy for a few days. And then I did see the guy. And apparently he had talked to Jenny B about this burning question. And he wanted to know if Jenny B had relayed the story to me, which she hadn't, because Jenny B realizes that not every story needs to be relayed. And I said, no, she hadn't. And he goes, well, I got to ask you. He goes, there's a YouTuber out there that basically said that he gave you and Jenny your start. He wanted to know whether or not it was true. And as I've contemplated this interaction, I don't guess that question in and of itself is quirky. We operate in a large, cruising community, creative cruising community. And I think a lot of times people think that the connections between creators in this creative cruising community is strong, like we're all best friends or we're all hanging out together, when that's certainly not the case. I would say for the most part, there's, maybe a handful of creators that I know personally, that I've strategized with, that I collaborate with, just a handful out of the hundreds of people in this community. But what I've seen over time that, the more success that you have or the more notoriety that you get, people want to be attached to you. And that happens in two ways. People want to be attached to you in the concepts of like, yeah, I worked with those guys and, that kind of thing, in a positive attachment. And then there's also people that want to be attached to you in a negative way. Oh, I don't like those guys. Those guys, let's talk trash about those guys. I've seen both of those play out, at least in my personal experience as we've been doing this. And so I do understand the question. But what I find more quirky than the question is the enthusiasm around asking the question. I don't know if his enthusiasm was like maybe he anticipated that I would react or Jenny would react to somebody saying something about us, and his enthusiasm was for that react. I really can't pinpoint what the enthusiasm was about when it came to this question, but there was a level of disappointment on my part because it's like, we have so little opportunity to interact with people, right? I mean, not just me, just in life. There's so many people in the world, and you have just limited time to interact with people, and you want those interactions to be substantial. And yeah, this one seemed like a missed opportunity, I guess, but a quirky interaction nonetheless. Now, Let's talk about the Deli manhandling incident. This happened on the very last day of the cruise, and I was at the Carnival Deli picking up my lovely wife a sandwich. I was standing in line, minding my own business, when all of a sudden, a big old man hand wrapped itself around the back of my neck. The gentleman was shorter than I was. I was pulled in close to his mouth, my ear to his mouth, close enough where I could smell the alcohol on his breath. And he said, "Hey, man, you don't need to be getting anything from here." And I pulled away from the grip and I looked at the guy, I looked down at the guy and I'm like, "What? Like, I don't need to be getting anything from the deli? Why would you say that?" And he said, you just don't need it." And I'm like, "Okay." And I didn't know the guy from anywhere. I assume maybe he watched the show. I don't know. Could have just been a random stranger looking at my pear-shaped body saying, "This fatty doesn't need a turkey sandwich," or whatever from the deli. But it was weird. And it was super weird. And I looked at him again and I said, "Do you have a problem with deli sandwiches?" And then I think he could tell by the look on my face that I was not digging the interaction. And he stepped back a foot and he was like, "Oh, yeah, no, it's just, there's probably better options on the cruise ship. Man, you sure brought the nice weather with us, right?" I was like, "Yeah." That was it. But imagine it. Imagine just standing there and a stranger, I mean, he put a good hand on me. And please don't touch strangers. I'm not going to walk up and touch a stranger. I've shaken a hand, I've given a hug, but all of that comes with some sort of, social contract of extending the hand or extending the fist, or, are you a hugger? All of that, those kind of interactions, appropriate. But just grabbing me or grabbing a stranger unawares, inappropriate. I don't think there's any circumstance where just grabbing somebody is appropriate, whether they're on the YouTube or not on the YouTube. It's quirky. Stranger danger. Am I right? Have you hit the like button? Have you subscribed? Please do those things. I don't know if any of those interactions were more uncomfortable than the time that stranger showed up at my cruise cabin. Did you see that video? Make sure you check it out next. Tony for La Lido Look. Until the next time. We'll see you on the Lido. Bye.